The title is The Right Response. The Right Response. That's a lifelong challenge. When you're confronted with something or someone asks you a question, giving the proper response to it. Not only that, the big deal is this: giving the right response to God. When God puts something in your life, we should respond correctly. We've watched Moses respond incorrectly. When God showed up at the burning bush, he said, I'm going to have you go down there to your people, and they're going to listen to you, and this is what you're going to say and do. And he says, wait a minute, I can't talk, and they won't believe anyway. And God had to help him get over that. But we'll go to the end of the chapter, Exodus chapter 4. This is basically how the story ends. I've skipped about 5 sermons we could have preached, but we've done enough of them on this one chapter. Exodus 4, verse 31. It says, and the people believed. That's good. And when they heard that the Lord had visited the children of Israel, and they looked upon their affliction, then they bowed their heads and worshipped. This was the result of what God had finally convinced Moses, or engineered things so that he would actually do it. He's finally done his first mission with God, and it was a success. He didn't expect it to be. Many times it's this. If you look back in your life, the things God's had you to do, you thought were impossible. And you look back now and think like, oh, that wasn't any big deal. That's the way God works. The first thing we'll notice I call believe, not conceive. This is our problem. When life confronts us, or God says, I'm going to have you do this or that, our mind starts to build its own creation. We're not the creator. Let God be the creator. He's continually creating new things in our life all the time. And we think impossible. Let me ask you something. In your own mind, would you think it's possible for a man? Well, we know not a man couldn't do it, but would you think it was possible for someone to say, let there be light, and the light's turned on? And I don't mean an LED. Let there be a sun, let there be stars, and it just show up? Well, that's the kind of creator we have. So don't be surprised if in life he asks us to do some impossible things, because he's not counting on us to do it. We're one little clog in the wheel. He says in our text there, he says, and the people believed. Now that went contrary to what Moses thought was going to happen. Moses told God, these people will not hearken to me. God says, I've already told you they will. Now get going, boy. Moses' true conflict with God was in the belief department. Moses believed God's power to work miracles one-on-one because he had experienced that. It's easy for us to believe God for the things he's already done. But when he provides a new opportunity, we say, wait a minute, let's go back to repeating the same things we've seen you do already. He says, no, we're going to stretch you a little bit. We're going to move on to the next one, and I'm going to show you I'm even bigger than you ever thought I was. God was ready to deliver the Israelites from bondage. If he was thinking, his brain would have said, hey, this is a happy message everybody will receive. Why did he think that was going to be a problem? But guess what? A lot of times it is a problem. Try giving the lost world around you the good news that Jesus Christ is going to deliver them from hell, and find out how many balk at it. Now that's just life experience has taught Moses, just because it's good news doesn't necessarily mean people are going to believe it. Now God says, I'm not worried about the results so much as I am you doing what I told you to do. But God had told him on the front end, I've already rigged this thing. Your brethren are going to hear you. They're going to hearken. We get down to the end of the chapter. When it actually happens, they did believe, just as God had told them. Look at Numbers chapter 20. Numbers 20, verse 12. Unfortunately, this is not a lesson that you learn once and you never have to relearn it. All the way through, we find the great man Moses, the one who's the type of Jesus Christ that's to come. And he's dealing with an issue. The issue is belief. For all of us, There comes a time, if you just learned it all of a sudden and you never had to relearn it, your belief would be pretty shallow. But we've got a very deep God. Therefore, we're always relearning the lesson of believe what he said. Numbers 20, verse 12. And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron, because you believed me not to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore ye shall not bring this congregation into the land which I gave them. He says you've still got a belief issue. Now sometimes there can be growth in belief, and sometimes there's a limit. God says, you should have believed me, and because of it, something bad's going to happen. Here, Moses and Aaron don't get to go into the promised land. God laid the fault for that at the belief thing. He said, you didn't believe me enough. Now I understand, we connect it to the action. And that's the way the story plays out. Remember why Moses couldn't go in? He struck the rock when he should have spoke to it. Instead of speaking to that rock, he disobeyed what God told him. God says the problem was not the action. The problem was the inside. You didn't believe me. I would say that's some strong belief. He smacked a rock. I wouldn't go around smacking rocks expecting water to come flying out. But he was believing in the wrong thing. He was believing in his past history. God did it this way before. No, you believe exactly what God says for the moment. Moses had never seen God pour water out of a rock by just speaking to it. God says, no, the problem is you didn't obey me because you didn't believe me. We have Mark chapter 9. Mark 9, verse 23. Belief is good, but only if it's put in the right place. If it's belief in phony baloney, it's fantasy. Mark 9, verse 23. And Jesus said unto him, if thou canst believe, all things are possible to him that believeth. And straightway the father of the child cried out and said with tears, Lord, I believe, help thou mine unbelief. That's a good place to get to. When you can recognize that you're not believing enough. Now, you got to do something about it. You don't be content with just not having enough faith. Don't be content with that. This man did the right thing. He went to the right source to find more faith. You find more faith only on the pages of Scripture, not on Facebook. Facebook's going to give you many things to believe in, but it's phony. Only God gives you 100% truth, unadulterated. Amen. Look at it in Hebrews 11. Hebrews 11, verse 6. Verse most of us have memorized, Hebrews 11:6. He says, but without faith it is impossible to please him. That is, the lost world wants to do Christian moral things to be seen, and maybe to achieve some goals. They want to, appear to be Christian-like. But they don't have faith in God. Without faith in God, God's not happy. You know what happens when you displease God? His anger falls. Now let's look at it. He says it's impossible to please him without faith. So if he's not pleased, what is he? He's displeased. He says in the rest of the verse, for he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. That's positive thinking. You can get in trouble with this positive thinking thing unless you've found the right source for it. Oprah Winfrey's positive thinking won't help you. The creator of this universe's positive thinking will. When he says a thing, it's a fact. In Moses' heart, doubts did weave, yet faith prevailed, causing him to believe. God's plan of deliverance, God will achieve. It's not on us to do everything. We're simply following the plan God's laid out. We didn't lay the plan out. When God showed up to Moses, Moses hadn't been cooking up a plot and plan of how he was going to deliver his people. He had given up on it. He started out in Egypt. He knew that was his mission, was one day he's going to be the deliverer, and he's got a great call on his life. And so he goes out and he fixes a problem when he sees it. Somebody's mistreating another person, so he takes care of it. He takes them all the way out. Kills them. Thinking, well, this is a no-brainer. I see the right and the wrong, and I took care of it like anyone would. And they didn't receive that. They said, no, who made you boss? He ran. Now God says, now we're going to do it my way, my plan. Completely different than what Moses had thought it was going to be. God's going to do the same with you and I. It'll be a different plan, probably. The steps will be than we had ever imagined. Amen. The next thing I'll see in our text, Exodus 4:31, is attitude, not entitlement. You have to have the proper attitude toward God. The big thing that the world is pushing right now is entitlement. You deserve. Yet you deserve nothing. Entitlement. He said in our verse, you see the phrase there, he says, and looked upon their affliction. God's looking. He's watching. He says, they've been afflicted long enough, and I think I can deliver now. Affliction does something. It changes your attitude. Usually what happens with affliction is you bow up and you resist it. You're fighting it. It's uncomfortable. At some point, you realize some afflictions, this is more than I can handle. You do one or two things. You go to somebody bigger who can take care of it, or you give up and give into it. There are some God-given afflictions we're not supposed to fight in our own strength. The children of Israel had no need to dramatize it, exaggerate it, or reiterate it. God had seen it. They were literally being afflicted. God says they were in the house of bondage. God saw that wasn't right, but you know what? God didn't snap his fingers and immediately fix it either. So there was something beneficial in it for them, even though it was very cruel to them. Same thing happens when they come into Canaan. He says there's a bunch of wild beasts there and a bunch of enemy armies and heathen nations. I'm going to drive them all out and give you that land, but I'm not going to do it all at once. That's the way he works in our life. A little bit here and a little bit there. If we're not careful, we'll have the entitlement mentality and say, no, I want it all now. You couldn't handle it if you got it all now. Look at Psalm 34. Psalm 34, verse 18. Great verse. He says, Psalm 34:18, the Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart, and saveth such as be of a contrite spirit. That is a humble attitude toward God. The Bible says right here, the Lord's nigh unto them. He sees it. If something is not fair, we have this idea of fair. If something is not fair, doesn't mean God can't still use it for us. It was not fair the way the Egyptians were treating the Israelites. That wasn't fair. But God was using it because when he was done letting this affliction happen to them, he calls them his army. That's how you train an army. You afflict them. You make them do things they didn't want to do to begin with. And you mold them into something that can be powerful. And that's what God had been doing. Now he said in our verse there in Psalms, he saveth such as be of a contrite spirit. That is, you're going to have things in life you need saving from. I know salvation is eternal and that's, you get saved once and that's done. However, every day just about it seems like something's happening you need salvation from. You need to be saved from the car wreck. Saved from the crazy nuts that are driving on the road trying to run you off. Now, if you'll keep your attitude right between you and God, He'll be saving you probably in ways you never know until we get to heaven. Look at 147. Psalm 147, verse 3. Psalm 147, verse 3. The Israelites, no doubt, were at their wits' end, I would imagine. They've been in bondage. Looks like there is no help. The Egyptians begin getting more and more cruel. We're going to kill your babies. I mean, talk about a tough time. That was tough. Psalm 147, verse 3. He healeth the broken in heart, and bindeth up their wounds. Now, if you ever wanted somebody to do heart surgery, it would be God, not man. God says right here, I look down there and I see somebody with a broken heart, and I do my job. He's the great physician. And that's what he did. Look at Isaiah 41. He says, fear thou not. Okay, if he said fear not, that means you were somewhere you were scared of. Else it wouldn't have done any good to say don't be afraid.
Like the angels.
So you're going to be in situations where it's going to be natural to fear.
Yep.
God's response is this: if I'm near, no need to fear.
Amen.
That's what he says, fear thou not. For I am with thee. Be not dismayed. Dismayed. What's dismayed mean? Yeah.
Downhearted.
Disappointed. He says, be not dismayed. Many times in life, dismay is the enemy that shows up. You were plotting and planning, and you really had conceived in your mind this would happen, it would go down this way, and it didn't. Don't get sad about it. He says right here, God's with you, and he'll take care of it. He says, don't be dismayed. You know what that's training? That's training you to tell your mind what's going on, not the other way around. If you're not careful, that little 2-pound lump of junk in your head will try to run you. And it's not supposed to. We're not supposed to be run by our brain. We tell our brain from the Word of God what's right, not the other way around. He says, be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee. Yea, I will help thee. Yea, I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness. Now, if you ever needed a good promise, there's one right there. Hold on to that one. God saw their affliction and felt their lament, teaching us humility and to be content, with gratitude, not entitlement. When Moses shows up and tells the people, God's going to deliver you, he's seen your affliction, they did the right thing. They didn't say, yeah, well, why didn't he get here sooner? It's a good thing he showed up to them, because if he had showed up to a bunch of Americans, you know what we would have said? A little too late. You know, we've been down here for 430 years. Why is he all of a sudden now saying he's going to do it? But don't overthink God. When God says this or this, don't push him. He knows exactly what he's doing, and he's got a plan. Now, if they responded correctly, they didn't have one more word to say. You know, it's hard to shut up sometimes.
Yep, I agree.
One of the first lessons a child has to learn is this. When I say do something, you go do it. You don't say why. That's the that'll frustrate you to no end. If you have to have a reason for everything, it does not have to be reasonable to a 2-year-old when you tell it to go to bed. You don't need to reason with it. He doesn't need to understand it. He needs to obey it.
I agree.
God's the same way with us. Many things he tells us we must obey without understanding. That's exactly what the brethren had done here in our passage. They said, God said it, we believe it, it's a fact, we don't have to understand it. The next thing I'll see in our text, Exodus 4, verse 31, he says there, he gives a phrase, he says, they bowed their heads. He wasn't given an invitation here. Verse 31, Exodus 4:31. It says, they bowed their heads. Moses and Aaron didn't say, somebody play us a hymn, and we're going to have a invitation here, and every head bowed and every eye. No, they did this naturally. When God gives you an invitation, that's the response. Humility. This is an odd thing. This is not the normal way the Jews prayed. You know how a Jew would pray in the Old Testament? They would lift up their hands and their face to God. This is something different. Here they're doing the opposite. They're bowing in submission. Now you can't lift your hands until you've bowed your head first. Now you may not physically bow your head, but the same is true internally. The action is submission. Except for a giraffe, I think, the most relaxed position for all men and animals is a bowed head. That's the gesture they're giving, is I'm not resisting anything. Whatever you want, God, that's yours. Look at it in Psalm 95. Psalm 95, verse 6. This is a different definition of worship than most people have. Most people think worship means you're putting on some sort of a show. You're giving some action. That's not biblical worship. Biblical worship is head bowed. Psalm 95, verse 6. O come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker. True worship, according to Exodus, was when they bowed their heads. True for us as well. You're not worshiping God by producing some show that He needs to see. He created the whole universe. Do you think you're going to put on any show that's going to impress Him? I don't think so. He says, this is the show I'm looking for. Someone in submission. Someone with a bowed head. Philippians 2. We are the demonstration to the world. We're supposed to be anyway. Of what a Christian is supposed to do. But not only that, of what God's going to demand everyone do. Philippians 2, verse 10. That at the name of Jesus every knee should bow. Of things in heaven and things in the earth and things under the earth. That every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of the Father. That is, He says, I'm giving you opportunity to bow now, but one day it's not going to matter whether you wanted to or not. I'm going to put you on your knees. It'd be a good idea for every Christian to get in the habit of doing it now. You know, it'd be bad to get up to the judgment and suddenly not know how to bow to God and Him force you to do it. Now, when you see Him, you'll be like Him, so you won't have to worry about that. But the heathen will. He's going to force them down on their knees.
Yay.
Revelation 19, verse 10. Revelation 19:10. If you bow to God, you won't bow to some of the world's gods.
Good.
You're not supposed to bow to anything but Him. He says in Revelation 19:10, this is an angel that has been speaking to John. And I fell at His feet to worship Him. And He said unto me, see thou do it not. I am thy fellow servant and of thy brethren, that have the testimony of Jesus. Worship God, for the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. There, even an angel is not someone that qualifies for you to bow and worship. The Catholics have to figure that out. We don't worship saints. We don't worship angels. There's only one worthy of it, God. In reverence, let us trust His might. No earthly words can e'er requite. God's majesty must be our heart's delight. That's a fact. If you truly put your delight in only Him, that's the only one you'll bow to. And it will be natural. I know it's not natural for a long time. You've got to get enough Bible in you, and you've got to see enough of who God really is before it starts changing you. But soon it will be natural to make Him your delight, not this earth and this flesh. In conclusion, look at Psalm 46. Psalm 46, verse 9. It says, He maketh wars to cease. Man, humans have been trying to do that for thousands of years. You know, the war to end all wars? No, it just meant wars got even more vicious.
Yes.
Psalm 46, 9, He maketh wars to cease unto the end of the earth. He breaketh the bow and cutteth the spear in sunder. He burneth the chariot in fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the heathen. I will be exalted in the earth. One day it will be a fact. Everything will be just like man has always tried to achieve. You know, peace on earth everywhere and world, that's the standard Miss America answer. World peace. They don't know what it is, but they think that's the right answer.
Geez, that's what butter beans go.
That's right.
Always want to be honey every time.
Notice how God achieves peace by war. That's the same way man does it. Man says, if you won't submit, I'll come down there and force you to. God says, that's the way I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do it in pure righteousness. He says he makes wars to cease. How's he going to do it? He breaks their bow, cuts their spears in sunder, and burns their chariots with fire. That's pretty vicious. But that's what's required. Now, if a man understands that's who God is, it should be natural to bow to him in submission. He said, be still. That is, you don't have to do much. That's one of the lies of the devil, is you're not doing anything for God unless you're physically out there doing something big. This big moving around and, you know, there's this is one thing I have an issue with most churches about. Is they've got 99,000 programs you've got to be involved in. That doesn't give anybody any time to read their Bible or think. They're too busy. Okay, slow it down. God says right here, be still. We've all been sick. A lot of that is God saying, be still. You know when your body heals itself? When you're sleeping. Sometimes it's good to get you some extra sleep. That's when the body takes care of business. He says, be still, and in that being still is not for your own pleasure. Be still and know that I am God. When problems show up, you know when it's hardest to be still? When the problem says, hurry, move, get going, do this, do that. No, we don't have to do all that doing this and doing that, because we know who God is. He says, I will be exalted among the heathen. That is, one day he's not giving them a choice. One day it will be a fact. Till God's majesty is made reality, respond right.